On today's show, we continue our series of stories about Minnesota going down the drain. Water is flowing through Minnesota's landscape faster than ever. Where's the water end up, and what problems are flowing with it? And while the water quality issue is a serious one, there is hope out there, even if it is in small doses. We'll meet some farmers in both Iowa and Minnesota who are getting the farming practices right and still make a buck. Those stories and more, next.
Minnesota Bound. Brought to you by Minnesota's select GMC dealers.
Hi everybody, Raven and I welcome you to the show. We'll continue now looking at farm issues, what's happening in farm country and our natural resources. But coming up, Minnesota has water flowing north and water flowing south. What does that mean for water quality? Travis Frank has the answers.
Minnesota grasslands are diminishing at a record pace. In the last 5 years, roughly 1.3 million acres have been converted to corn, soybeans, and wheat. In 2012, an additional 300,000 acres of CRP were set to go under the plow. Drain tile proves that you can farm nearly anywhere. But what's the cost? Today, water is flowing through Minnesota's landscape faster than ever. Thousands of individual drains direct water immediately into our streams and rivers. In many cases, we never see where the water ends up or the problems that flow with it. Such is the case with Minnesota's Red River, flowing 550 miles north into Canada before eventually dumping into Lake Winnipeg. The problem? Researchers say the Red River carries dangerous loads of phosphorus out of Minnesota and into Lake Winnipeg. Because of this, the Global Nature Fund labeled Lake Winnipeg as the world's most threatened lake for 2013. Bruce Benson and his son Ty are two of more than 800 commercial fishermen that make a living here.
That's what we're after right there. Walleye.
In the past decade, Lake Winnipeg has become North America's top walleye producer, exporting up to 15 million pounds each year.
I asked my dad if his dad had seen this abundance of fish, and he just shook his head no. And that takes us back to before 1900. There's just that much fish in the lake right now. There is a nutrient overloading problem in Lake Winnipeg. More nutrients, more fish. But the problem is if it gets too much, then you can have eutrophication, and that is where the system can't handle all the algae that is produced by the nutrients.
Every year the lake has an algae bloom. Some years the lime green sludge becomes so thick it can be seen from satellite images above. Alex Salke and a team of scientists have spent the past 30 years studying Lake Winnipeg algae blooms. Their findings, alarming.
The phosphorus load to Lake Winnipeg is about 8,000 tons per year. 6,000 tons comes mostly from the Red River watershed. And this is a agriculturally based watershed.
Studies show because of an increase in drain tile, nutrients and fertilizers are now entering the Red River faster than ever before. Some fear a nutrient overload may crash the big lake.
In Manitoba, the incidence of drain tiles is not as, I think, dense as in North Dakota and Minnesota.
The finger points back at Minnesota and our landscape.
I don't really blame the farmers. They don't want to put fertilizer into the lake. They want it on their crops. They want it on their land. 80% of this fish ends up being eaten, a lot of it, in Minnesota. So it's in the best interest of people from Minnesota who like pickerel or like walleye that we have a clean lake.
We need to manage our waters on a watershed and a drainage basis, rather than on legal boundaries, square boundaries. Restoring our landscape, the capacity of our landscape The monoculture approach certainly is good to feed the world, but whether or not it's good to sustain our waters in our watershed, that's another question. And that's an economic question that I can't answer. People will have to answer that for themselves.
So the question remains, will Lake Winnipeg crash from a nutrient overload? Or will we make the changes to protect it? Right there is the Minnesota River.
When we return, we'll continue to explore the waters of the Minnesota River, Lake Pepin, and the Dead Zone.
Minnesota Bound, brought to you by Minnesota's select GMC dealers. Ice Force, Connecticut, and by Seven Clans Casino.
Welcome back. Well, now we've seen that Minnesota delivers some tainted water flowing north. What about our water flowing south?
As we've seen, Minnesota's Red River flowing north into Lake Winnipeg has many concern about the future. But it's important for us to also look at what flows south. Beginning near the western Minnesota town of Ortonville, our Minnesota River flows 318 miles east before ultimately reaching St. Paul. There, it dumps into Pool 2 of the Mississippi River. To the right, the Mississippi, rather clean and clear. To the left, a brown color that looks a bit more like chocolate milk. That's the Minnesota. Right there is the Minnesota River. It's a lot of sediment in that water. For years, biologists, wastewater treatment plants, and farmers have all worked together in hopes of cleaning up a well-known pollution problem. Glenn Skuda with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency says it still needs work.
We definitely want to see some decreases to the current levels of nitrogen in the Minnesota and decreases in the amount of sediment.
Sediment levels are on the rise. Scientists studying the river say increased drain tile in the watershed has increased the river's velocity and how fast it flows downstream. Eventually, the increased sediment reaches the Mississippi River, then deposits into Lake Pepin. The Mississippi River carries enough pollutants south that it creates a dead zone where the water flows into the Gulf of Mexico. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, this year, that dead zone covers approximately 5,480 square miles. Their definition of the dead zone looks like this. Dead zones are the indirect result of nutrients, largely from fertilizer use, running off land, into rivers, and then into bodies of water such as the Gulf.
All the states that drain to the Mississippi are contributing something, but Minnesota has a significant portion of that, and we need to be a good upstream neighbor and do better.
The unique thing about Minnesota is water flows off us. You know, it's going north, it's going to Mississippi, and it goes to Missouri. So we have that responsibility. We have the start. We have the start of where that water starts to move downhill. And the cost increase as you try to clean it up farther and farther away from where that contamination, if there's contamination, can occur.
Back home, some Minnesota communities are experiencing water troubles of their own.
In St. Peter, they are treating their drinking water to remove nitrates because of higher nitrate levels.
The most recent water quality report in Minnesota said that more than 25% of the state's waterways are too contaminated with nitrates to be used for drinking water. By depleting more grassland and wetlands, the list of contaminated waters will only go up.
When we return, we'll meet some farmers who are getting it right, working with both Mother Nature and their farming operations.
Closed captioning is brought to you by the Yard, premier manufacturers of maintenance-free outdoor patio furniture and accessories from recycled plastic.
By the Yard maintenance-free furniture. Comfort, elegance, and recycling combined. Call today for your free catalog or go online to buytheyard.net.
Welcome back. As you can see, there are some serious water and wildlife issues in farm country, but there are also possible solutions. Who has them? Chances are it's farmers themselves. Bill Shirk has the story.
To understand what's happening to our landscape is to take a drive through the country and just look around. We did. We watched prairies and cattail sloughs go up in smoke. Tractors continue to plow over prairie grass and make more room for corn. Come spring, uncountable miles of drain tile crisscross our agricultural landscape. 100 and 500-year floods seem to suddenly be annual events, and even our most beloved water systems seem to be in trouble.
It's a big problem. It's a big problem. What happens is when you replumb the landscape that way, you just short circuit any of the natural processes that might clean the water that's filtering through soil before it reaches streams and rivers, and it just short circuits that whole system.
It is more about business. It's about rental properties to get the most out of it. It's about a very perverse agricultural policy on a national level where I get paid money to farm dangerously.
To meet Minnesota's Mike Osterholm is to meet a man who clearly does not mix words. Consider Mike a grassroots conservationist. A scientist by trade, Mike set out to prove to himself and the world that we can reverse the wounds we inflict on our landscape. The proof, Mike's 100-acre Iowa farm. A place Mike calls Prairie Song. 10 years ago, Mike purchased this corn farm and got to work on a living experiment. He wanted to see if he could take a farm landscape back to a time before plow met soil.
I think it's a combination of the more I learned, the more I realized I didn't know. And the more I didn't know, the more I wanted answers.
Mike worked with both state and federal partners, as well as conservation groups like Trout Unlimited. First task, haul away all the eroded topsoil. Dirt several feet deep had literally washed from the farms up on the bluffs and covered the valley. Mike then replaced corn with native prairie grass and flowers, the very plants that flourished here long before any of us.
There are a number of really rare plants in here.
But on this property, the biggest task might have been water. Waterloo Creek winds through the heart of the farm, a pure lifeblood source for native bugs, plants, fish, and wildlife. Over on the hillside, a small stream farmers long ago ditched and drained. Now, using old aerial photos and a bit of detective work, Mike's team found the stream's original meander.
And we hit groundwater and rock all the way up. This is the bottom end down there.
They redug the stream bed, and on a frigid Iowa winter day, cement trucks filled with old river rock pulled in.
And we actually rocked that stream that day. Okay, and it worked. It worked.
Nearly 10 years later, Brook Creek is a healthy tributary that looks like it did 1,000 years ago. It's now home to one of Iowa's most threatened strains of native brook trout.
Now you got another stream here, and this is all we use this for is a nursery stream. So for the DNR to take fish out of. So it's a whole other opportunity to save that fish. Just so you know right where we're at right now, we're under 3 feet of water right here.
Just days before our shoot, an epic rain event hammered the Waterloo Creek watershed. Get this, 14.5 inches of rain in a day.
I mean, you can look today, we're just literally just days out from the last catastrophic flood, which, you have video evidence of what happened here. And look where we're at today, it's remarkable. That's really exciting, and for people to see that, they recognize that this water-land connection is huge. It's not two discrete places.
Just 1 mile downstream, the other side of the coin, this farmer's corn is literally falling into Waterloo Creek. No one can question that countless tons of soil from this valley washed downstream in the storm and are now headed for the Gulf of Mexico. And to think, just a mile upstream, Mike's Prairie still looks like this.
I think on a micro level, this project's not changing the world at all. But it is changing the fact that people see what can be done. what happens on the land happens in the water, what happens in the water happens in the land. And today, as we see these changes in patterns of precipitation, it becomes even more important.
Is Minnesota still going down the drain? We do find some hope out there on the farming landscape.
Minnesota Bound, brought to you by Radco Truck Accessories, Minnesota Agricultural Water Resource Center, and by Visit Grand Rapids.
Hey there, Bill Shirk, the man about the woods. Lear's 100XQ truck topper sets the industry standard. Frameless side windows match your truck. Hidden hinges, a carpeted headliner, and an LED dome light. That's the Lear difference. Lear also offers topper options like Thule roof racks and remote locking systems. Get to radco.com and check out Lear truck toppers. When your truck looks good, you look good.
Coming up, we're going to go to southwest Minnesota, where farming is very intensive, but there are farmers there who farm the right way for their soil, their water, and wildlife.
Okay, so it seems to be a theme. These days, topics like soil erosion and water pollution automatically get tied to farming. It's a big-time hot topic. Consider this, farmers own roughly half of all Minnesota's land base. 27 million of the state's 54 million acres.
So a lot of times we get blamed for 80% of the problem. When we look at the nutrients coming off of our farm ground, it might be 2 to 10%, not 80%.
It shouldn't be the burden of the farmer to make all the water quality for everybody. It should be everybody's expense.
Galen Gordon and his son Bill farm around Worthington. To look around their farm and to listen is to understand the Gordon's farm by a different standard.
I feel I've done more than my share as far as trying to protect the soil.
The Gordons farm by the old land use cliche, farm the best, buffer the rest. Around parts of the Gordons' 3,000 acres of crops, they left 66-foot wide prairie grass buffers between the fields and ditches where water drains. What those grass buffers do is really twofold.
The plan's in place. We have buffer strips in place to catch any erosion that we have.
Yep, the grass stops eroding soil from washing out of the fields and into nearby streams every time it rains. The other important impact of buffers comes from a higher power. That right there. See, almost all conventional farmers apply fertilizers to help their crops grow. They also spray chemicals to keep bad plants away.
I actually spray 12 gallons of water. 1 quart of that water is actually chemical.
Problem is, when it rains, the nutrients and chemicals can wash out of the fields. When too much runs into nearby rivers and lakes, the end result looks like this: severe nutrient overload and nasty algae blooms.
By having buffer strips like this, that airplane is accurate within the foot, believe it or not. And so when he sprays that cornfield, if the drift would come this way, it stops 10, 20 yards up in the grass. It doesn't come down by the water and affect the majority of the wildlife and the insects.
The water eventually makes its way downstream through the local golf course, right next door. The Gordons say since they came up with their wetland plan, they've essentially stopped what before was annual flooding on the course. Turns out the natural filtering cleaned up the water.
You could drink that water, but you test it and you're probably not even high in nitrate.
Another sign the Gordons' conservation plan works.
We are making an impact, I think. It might be small, but it is contagious.
And that's just the attitude some environmental watchdogs want to hear.
I think what we ought to do is look at the farmers who are making a good living, but protecting soil and water and wildlife at the same time, and ask them what's working for you. Why are you doing this? How are you making this work when all around you you see the opposite?
Go ahead, ask the Gordons. Believe me, they're happy to show you, whether you're a farmer or not.
That's the hope and the dream a farmer has. We want to leave the ground better. I want my kids to farm someday. It's a wonderful, wonderful time to be a farmer, but it's also responsibility for us to make sure we take care of what we have.
Well, that concludes our look at what's happening in Minnesota's landscape and down on the farm. I want to say this, though. We're not picking on farmers. I grew up in farm country, but what we have to do is work together to solve some issues that are very, very serious. That about does it. Remember, introduce a kid to the great outdoors, take them to a farm. I'm Ron Sherr, and of course the star of the show is Raven. I know.
Transportation provided by Premier Transportation. Call 1-800-899-7433. For more information on these stories and more, catch us on the web at mnbound.com.